and wages declining. And so cheap processed food became very irresistible to a lot of people.
Michael Pollan is the author of, well, his latest book, Food Rules and Eaters Manifesto. He is a professor of journalism at University of California, Berkeley. We'll be back with him in a minute. Cooks me cabbage. Champion Jack Dupree here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman as we return now to our interview with food expert and author Michael Pollan. His latest book is Food Rules and Eaters Manifesto. Shrufado Caduce and I sat down with him to talk to him about food, and I asked him for his assessment of how unhealthy Americans have become because of the way we eat.
Of the money we spend on health care, about $2.3 trillion, 3/4 of that goes to treat chronic diseases that are preventable. Now, they're not all food-related, but most of them are. You've got smoking and alcoholism in there, and I don't know where you want to count alcoholism, but you know, upwards of $500 to $750 billion we are spending to deal with the consequences of this diet. It's remarkable it's not a more central part of the conversation.
How could it be?
Well, I think the way it will become more important is right now there's no powerful interest in this country that really cares about our health, I'm sorry to say. Well, mom is a powerful interest, but not an organized interest with a lobby in Congress. The moms have not yet done what they should do, I think. But, you know, the healthcare industry profits mightily from the sickness of the population. You know, the food industry is producing lots of patients for the healthcare industry. It's a very convenient relationship. The health insurers, you would think, would have an interest in your health, but in fact, their business model up till now is based on keeping you out of the pool if you are likely to get chronic disease. If you have a pre-existing condition, for one, you can't get in. And then if you develop one, they raise your rates and do everything they can to get you out, or they have a lifetime cap or whatever it is. Under the health care bills, both the House and Senate bills, right now, there are rules that should require them to insure everybody on an equal footing, so that no more pre-existing condition, no more underwriting in effect. Underwriting is the process of deciding who you want, and underwriting is basically used to keep sick people out of that pool. Once the healthcare industry finds that they're stuck with people with chronic diseases, they will develop, I think, a strong interest in keeping us healthier. And this is a very optimistic view, I realize, and we'll see if it works out this way. But every new case of type 2 diabetes, which basically is caused by lifestyle, by diet, and exercise to some extent, but 80% of it is diet, costs them an extra $6,600 a year per patient, up to $400,000 over the life of the diabetic. So that is, for every case they can prevent of type 2 diabetes, which is not that hard to prevent.
How do you prevent it?
That's $400,000 of profit. So I think the way change comes in this country is if powerful interests have you know, an interest in dealing with it. And suddenly you might find health insurers supporting a soda tax or supporting a public health education campaign around soda. That is the easiest way to prevent type 2 diabetes, is reduce. Our adolescents are getting 15% of their calories from soda in America today. That's a really easy fix. Demonize soda, basically, or educate people about its health effects. Nobody would support that right now, but if the health insurance industry started supporting it, the way they got on board for the anti-smoking eventually, because they had an interest in it, then you could see some change. You could see the health insurance industry taking an interest in the Farm Bill, buying a few seats on those committees. forgive my cynicism, but right now those committees are controlled by agribusiness. Well, what if the health insurance industry controlled a few of those seats?
Explain how agriculture fits in with the whole issue of food and diet.
Well, the food system we have is, in large part, a game played according to a set of rules that are encoded, enshrined in the Farm Bill. That's the big piece of legislation that organizes the food system. It decides which crops get supported by the government, how they get supported. It also has the food stamp program in there, SNAP it's now called. It has a lot of the rules governing everything from farmers markets, support for farmers markets, vouchers at farmers markets, food safety issues. I mean, everything is in there. How farmers can manage their lands, conservation programs. And historically, that bill has been used to produce a certain kind of food supply. For many years, that bill was used to support farm prices, and that was a boon to American farmers, and as it turns out, to American eaters as well, because you didn't have these oversupplies of corn and soy, which lead to a lot of junk food. But beginning really in the 70s under the Nixon administration, when food prices had gotten high and it was a bit of political peril for Nixon, because of the grain deal with Russia. There's a complicated history to it, but we had food price inflation, and Nixon hired Earl Butz, brilliant agricultural economist from Purdue, and his mission was drive down food prices, do whatever you can. And the way Butz did it was encouraging farmers to move toward monocultures of corn and soy, and getting rid of we had something called the ever-normal granary. It was a grain reserve. And when you have a grain reserve, and this goes for an African country as much as an American country, it gives the government the ability to keep prices from spiking too high or crashing too low, because you can open the spigot. If there's not enough grain, you can release it, and if there's too much, you can buy it. It's a very powerful tool. We gave that up, and the reason we gave it up is the international traders didn't like having the government affecting prices. They wanted to affect prices themselves. And we also moved from a system of supporting the prices of agricultural commodities to, which we did by loaning farmers money rather than when prices fell, so they didn't have to sell into a weak market. We changed that to a system of direct payments, where we simply cut them a check for the difference between a target price and the market price. This allowed them to dump commodities into a market that was poor, and that market went down further. So we basically redesigned subsidies in a way that forced prices down. And that leads to this overproduction of corn and soy, and I think is one of the causes of the obesity epidemic. I mean, we're eating 500 more calories per person per day since this period, and that's because they're really cheap and attractively packaged.
What about the issue of the American diet and industrial agriculture on global warming? We were recently in Copenhagen for the UN Climate Summit, and we spoke with the head of the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, Rajendra Pachauri, and he said he was encouraging people to be vegetarian and not eat meat because it reduced carbon emissions by such an extent. Talk about the effect on global warming.
Well, meat production, the food system in general is basically the largest, or just about the largest, producer of greenhouse gases. And it happens, it's important to understand it happens at every level. It's not just the transportation. It's not food miles, which we hear a lot about. It begins on the farm. Are you using synthetic fertilizers? Those are made from fossil fuels. Those are made from natural gas. Take a lot of energy to produce. Are you, what kind of equipment are you using? Are you then drying your corn or soy using natural gas? The pesticides are all made from petroleum products. All through the system, it is just, we've essentially taken this sun-driven process called photosynthesis, and we've put it on a diet of fossil fuel to make it more productive, and basically to replace labor on the farm. I mean, only 1% of Americans are feeding the rest of us. It's astounding. How do they do it? Well, lots of fossil fuel. We used to have 40% of the country involved in agriculture. So there's no question that the food system and its reliance on fossil fuel is driving climate change. The worst culprit in this complex is animal agriculture. Basically because, let's take beef as an example. That's the worst offender. It takes 10 pounds of grain, all of which, each of which takes a lot of fossil fuel to grow, 10 pounds of grain to produce 1 pound of beef. So it's very inefficient use of resources. I mean, you know, Francis Moore Lepay was telling us this in 1971. This isn't news, but the concern then was less about the fossil fuel than the equity of the issue.